and welcome to the What's New in Round 3 ASPPH and CEPH Dialogue on Accreditation, a webinar sponsored by the ASPPH Accreditation and Credentialing Committee. I would first like to go over the method for submitting questions. All the lines are on mute, so there's no static interference. For all attendees to submit questions, feel free to go ahead and start now, putting in questions using the chat box in the right-hand corner of your screen. I'd like to introduce those on the call today, starting with our webinar moderator, Dean David Goff of the Colorado School of Public Health. Dean Goff is the chair of the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health Accreditation and Credentialing Committee. We also have on board our member counselors to CEPH, Dr. Ian Lapp, Dean Aman Hakim, Dean John Finnegan, Ms. Ruth Gehr-Bernheim, and Dean Donna Peterson. With us here in the ASPPH offices today are our Council on Education for Public Health representatives, Ms. Laura Racer-King and Ms. Molly Mulvanity. I'd like to turn over the mic to Dean David Goff to review the ASPPH work to date in round 2 through round 3. David?
Thank you, Liz. I want to welcome everybody on the call today and thank you for participating. I think we've made a lot of good progress, and it's really all due to your great input as well as the work of Liz and our wonderful partners at ASPPH. Liz, could you move to the next slide? So I wanted to take the opportunity to remind you that we have submitted 2 rounds of comments on the proposed criteria to CEPH, and I believe they've been very responsive to our comments, and I hope that you'll agree and that you can see great evidence of that in the current draft of the criteria. Next slide, please. So in terms of setting the stage for the discussion today, I want to remind you that the criteria are organized a little bit differently than in the previous round of criteria. This slide shows the outline of the document, and you can find the document online at the link shown on this slide. You can also find them in the handout section of this webinar. So if you look in your, I'm not sure how it shows up on your screen. In my screen, I have a nice little box on the right-hand side of the screen that has an area called handouts, and there are 3 handouts in that section. And one of them is the draft criteria round 3 released February 1, 2016. If you don't already have that file open, you might want to open it as it may help with some of the discussion we're going to be having later today. Liz, next slide, please. These are the work groups that have been put together by ASPPH to put input into the process. These groups have commented now on multiple versions of the criteria, and as you can see, a lot of groups have been put together. You and your colleagues at your schools and programs have put a lot of work into reviewing the criteria and into giving feedback to CEPH. And all of these groups are staffed with wonderful volunteers and colleagues and staffed by our partners at ASPPH. Next slide. So as always, your input continues to be really important to us. You certainly have the right, and we encourage you to comment directly to CEPH as individuals and as individual schools and programs. The process that we are putting together to bring together comments from members through ASPPH is not intended to substitute for comments that you and your colleagues may want to submit from your institution. But if you want to make comments as part of the ASPPH process, we encourage you to submit those comments to Liz. I think you probably all know her email by now, and we welcome your comments. We believe that the consensus voice of academic public health will carry some weight. We have evidence of that from the responses that CEPH has made to our earlier comments, and so we really do encourage you to submit your comments to ASPPH, and if you submit an individual response, please copy Liz so that we'll know what your individual comments to CEPH are as well. Thanks. Next slide, please. Now we're going to turn it over for some comments from some of our other webinar members. Ian?
Thank you, Dean Goff. On behalf of the Council, I just want to thank ASPPH for their tireless commitment to collaboration. This is, as Dean Goff noted, really an effort of the field as Dean Finnegan often says, seek to define the floor or foundation of what is excellence at our accredited schools and programs. So this marks round 3, and rounds sometimes infer a boxing match, but again, this has been far from a boxing match, but in many ways a wonderful collaboration, and in my 15 years in the field, some of the most rich and positive collaboration of CEPH and ASPPH, as well as the larger field. And in part, that's a real tribute to our leadership at ASPPH, but also at CEPH, in particular, both Laura and Molly's tireless work on these issues. So this webinar is meant to both inform, but in terms of where we're at in the process, but for everyone participating to inform us as we go the distance in round 3, which is going on 13 months of thinking about these issues and moving towards a consensus on what our next generation of criteria are for our accredited schools and programs. I turn it back to you, Dean Goff. Thank you.
Next, Molly.
Hello, everyone. Going to give you a really brief overview today, just to sort of get everybody's mind refreshed about what we're doing here. So let me, whoops. All right. Excellent. Okay, so this is at the top of nearly every discussion that we have about this criteria revision process, because we want to keep these major priorities in the front of our minds and everybody else's minds when we go through this process. So what we're trying to do is ensure quality, increase flexibility, simplify, reduce the reporting burden, and then the fourth one is, of course, that we are going to preserve the distinction and designation between schools and programs, so we have to make some definitions around what that looks like. So here's a timeline of our own. You can see that we are now in our 3rd year of substantive work, and 2015 was the first big year in terms of releasing drafts and receiving comments, but we started way back in 2014, and we hope to and expect to be wrapping up in 2016. If you look at the bottom there, we've got one more comment round after the one that is currently open. And then we hope to adopt final criteria and an implementation plan that tells you what you will need to do by when. We're hoping to release that in November. So this is an overview, and to many of you who've been following the process, pretty basic. So what are the major changes that we proposed throughout the criteria revision process? No more 5 core areas listed as such. The 5 core areas are now embedded in specific competencies that we've defined for all MPH students. Also, I mentioned that one of the things we wanted to look at is the definition of the designation of school and the designation of program. And so we've redefined what is required to offer a school of public health. You'll notice reducing the number of MPH and doctoral degrees that are required. We have integrated the curricular criteria that were adopted for standalone baccalaureate programs into the criteria for schools and programs. That has been a long planned effort. The curricular criteria adopted for our SBP process were a result of the critical components element document that came out of the undergraduate task force in Framing the Future initiative, and really reflect the state of the art and the most updated thinking about undergraduate or baccalaureate public health education. We've also made some major changes in methods of counting faculty resources and determining how many faculty resources one needs. I'm going to sort of highlight that particular bullet because I think that's one that we need more discussion on in the rounds that are to come, the current comment round and in particular. We've changed the approach to the practice experience requirement for the MPH, moving away from a practicum that occurs at one point in time and has a certain number of hours. We are trying to introduce, following that flexibility theme, allow for innovation and try and get some new flexibility involved in that particular component. Defining the DRPH, that's probably one of the biggest challenges, I would say, in this criteria revision process. We've had historically in our criteria fairly minimal definition for the DRPH, our professional doctoral degree. And so in the criteria, we're engaged in a very robust discussion about how to put a little bit more definition around that degree. And then the other thing that I think many of you are hopefully feeling very happy about is we've vastly reduced the reporting burden in research, service, and other areas. We've removed all of those times where we ask you to list everything that's happened in the last 3 years, and less doing so is absolutely crucial. And in the vast majority of cases, it was not absolutely crucial to do so. So that's the overview of what's happening in the criteria revisions overall to date. But for those of you who've been following closely, what happened in the last round? So between comment round 2, the last one, and comment round 3, which is currently open. Well, we reduced the number of MPH and DRPH foundational competencies and updated the content. Some of the feedback we got in our first iterations of this were, wow, this is great that you're being specific about MPH and or DRPH competencies, but there are way, way too many of them. We heard that loud and clear, couldn't agree more. So we've made some attempts to address that, and I think that's going to be another component that we're going to be working on a lot in this and the next round of comments. We clarified the criteria that elicited the most comments and questions, and I've listed 2 of them there. We got a lot of comments on those. They were very helpful, and so we made some changes to reflect those helpful comments. We're also, as I said, to sort of highlight that the idea of thinking about how we count faculty resources, we made another adjustment between rounds 2 and 3, and as I said, I think we'll probably make more adjustments after round 3. And then what we did in this round, which some of you may or may not have picked up on, we added a component to the curricular criteria called Foundational Public Health Knowledge for MPH and DRPH students, separate from the set of competencies. And what the foundational public health knowledge is it's a little bit like the content areas for those who followed draft 1. Some things about public health that the council felt, you know, if you're graduating with an MPH or DRPH, you just should know. Some things about the history of public health, philosophy, and values, but things that don't quite rise to the level of a skill, such as the competencies that we've listed. So that's kind of the approach that we took with that particular component. So during round 2, we were very pleased to see that we had reached what appears to be consensus on many, many of the criteria. And if you have the criteria document pulled up right now, you can see that we've color-coded the criteria for those that seem to have reached consensus versus those that seem to need some more sort of substantive discussion. And so that allowed us to identify some priority areas for continuing discussion. The priority areas really to focus on as you look at this round 3 process and prepare feedback for us. I've got those up there, but want to emphasize that all of the criteria are open for comment still at this point. The priority areas are where we think the focus probably needs to be and should be, but we're happy to take comments on areas that are not identified as priority areas because there is always improvement that we can do throughout the document. So comment period 3 ends on May 16th. And you're going to go to our website, CEPH.org. All of the documents that you would need, including reference documents and the comment submission form, are there. So we will get another draft out to you in early July. And the comment period is going to last through summer and early fall. We'll give you exact dates. We're going to try and maximize the amount of time you have, but we also have to meet our own schedules. I'm thinking the due date is going to be in mid to late September. And then the big day will be in late October or early November, when we will hope to release a finalized set of criteria and that implementation plan that lets you know how you move forward with the new criteria in your own specific institution. The comments that we've gotten have been really helpful so far, and so I really appreciate that and hope that you'll keep the excellent comments coming.
Thank you, Molly. I don't know if I've been put on mute again. Hopefully
we can
you can
hear
me. So wonderful. So I would really welcome questions from people on the webinar. This is how you enter them. You submit your questions through the chat box. So we did get some questions prior to the webinar, and this first one I believe is a question for Laura or Molly from CEPH.
Is the MPH generalist still an option under the current or proposed criteria? Yes, definitely.
That was an easy one. So the next question has to do with why must there be a certain number of faculty members to be a school, and some programs have creative ways to share faculty. So if we refer to criterion C2 on page 10 of the document, this is where that information begins, and there is a section on page 11 in line 507 that says School of Public Health employs at a minimum 21 primary instructional faculty, and institutions with fewer than 21 primary instructional faculty are eligible for accreditation as public health programs. And public health programs must employ at minimum 3 primary instructional faculty. Prior to turning this over to Molly and Laura or others for their comments, it's my understanding that this has to do with assuring that there is a critical mass of faculty available at a School of Public Health to be able to educate graduates who will be able to make a broad impact on the field. So this is my understanding of the basic philosophy. Maybe others, we'll start with Molly and Laura and then move on to some of our CEPH counselors who may want to comment.
Absolutely. So David laid it out very perfectly. The concept of a critical mass is what we're looking for. That approach began really with our 2005 criteria and has continued to be sort of elaborated over time. It's interesting because the proposed criteria that we have out right now actually are considerably more flexible in many ways than the existing criteria in terms of faculty resources. So, you know, I think this topic is always one where we get down in the weeds really quickly, and it's not always the most thrilling. And as I said, I think we still have some work to do in the next few drafts on this. But one of the points I made on that very first slide where I talked about the goals and priorities in this process, you know, we heard very loud and clear that there was a desire to define a designation between schools and programs. And so part of that definition, as David said, is something about a larger body of faculty, of expertise. And so the numbers that we chose, we did not just pull out of the air. 21 is the status quo. That is the minimum number of faculty members that an accredited School of Public Health today would have. And 3 for programs is also the status quo. That is the minimum number of faculty a program in public health that's accredited today would have. So we are maintaining the status quo in a sense as the baseline and actually introducing more flexibility as we calculate measures above that baseline. I'd also like to sort of make the distinction that this question, terminology becomes really important. If you'll see, the question says, why must there be a certain number of faculty members to be a school? Question. Some programs have creative ways to share faculty. The term school and the term program is an important distinction here. Because of the way we've chosen to define a school is not for its primary faculty sharing. A program, by definition, is typically sharing and has a great deal more flexibility. So I think being very clear about which types of terminology we're using is important when we have these discussions.
So would any of our CEPH counselors like to weigh in on this issue?
This is John Finnegan. As you probably know, there's been a bit of discussion in the past on the distinction between a school and a faculty and a program and what's needed, and I think Molly summarized this really well. You know, to some extent, when you're looking at numbers, you know, there's a lot of debate over you know, the precise number here, but I think the critical mass concept is really the key here, and I suspect that over time this is going to be a bit of a moving target in the sense that we may say the status quo of 21 is good enough for now, but you know, down the road there may be a good rationale why that number should be changed again. But I think for right now this is a reasonable way to go, given that there is a distinction and should be a distinction between schools and programs. My take.
This is Liz. There are a few questions in the chat box related to this criterion, so if we could go to those. Is that all right, David, or does any other counselor have additional comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to the first question. It says, my question is related to faculty resources. Can a discrete faculty member of one concentration be a non-discrete faculty member for an other concentration?
Yes.
Okay. Follow up, can adjunct faculty be included in the non-discrete faculty count?
Yes.
All right. And then a separate question has come in on that. Defining faculty resources is complicated. How do you differentiate between a faculty member teaching 4 courses per academic year and one teaching 1 course or no courses due to research commitments?
Well, first of all, that depends on whether we're in a school or a program. And this is where I say terminology is really important. A school exists as, to use the word we're using throughout these criteria, a school exists as a discrete organizational unit. And that is somebody who is employed by the school is a primary faculty member of the school. So there's quite wide variation in teaching load from year to year and from school to school. So there is no difference in our mind in a school setting between someone who's teaching 4 courses a year and 1 course a year. Now, when you get down to the 0, that's where we have to be a little bit more specific. If a faculty member happens to buy out of all of his or her courses for 1 year, and it is sort of an unusual thing, then that individual may still remain among the primary instructional faculty. If this is a faculty member whose typical expectation of his or her workload is not going to involve teaching, maybe he or she will mentor a doctoral student here or there or teach a special seminar. If the primary function of that individual's job is 0 teaching, then that individual does not count toward our total of primary instructional faculty. If we're talking, if we're talking about a program, that's a very different answer as well. In programs, we have to take a holistic look at the individual and what his or her responsibilities are in the university. Is he or she doing some major teaching and advising for another academic program outside of public health, or is he or she primarily dedicated to public health? And again, we're just talking about a particular term or semester in which he or she has bought out some teaching time with research. So the situations really are very, they require very individual analysis, but I do think that there are some broad principles that we can agree upon.
Yes, as I understand the principle, that it really looks to me like it applies to both programs and schools, that if a faculty member is typically involved in teaching and they meet the other criteria, then they're considered a instructional faculty member. So if they go a semester or a year without teaching because of increased grant funding, they could still be counted under those circumstances. But if they're typically not involved in teaching, regardless of the other criteria that they meet, they're not primary instructional faculty. That's the way, I guess, that I read the material.
That is a perfect summary.
All right, there are a few more questions in the box, and please continue to submitting any questions or comments into the chat box. This one looks like it's from a new potential member, so we hope to welcome you someday into the fold. It says, we are in the process of preparing an application expressing interest to move toward accreditation to be submitted in the fall. How do the proposed changes affect how we are presently preparing using the current application?
Right. So any period of transition is going to give rise to a lot of these questions, and the answer that I'm always going to give is call me or one of my staff in the office, and we'll work through the nuances of the answer. The very specific answer is that if you are submitting an application in fall, you will follow our existing procedures. That's what we have adopted. That's what we have governing the world until we adopt something else. So you will absolutely be using what we have currently in place to structure your application. If you are thinking about, I always say, trying to fit square pegs into round holes just to meet some aspect of our current criteria that is likely to change, then we should have a longer conversation about potentially delaying the timing of your application. There are ways we can adjust the timing after an application, speed up the time to your site visit, and very staff that we can move to make this as useful and as least they're going to have to redo or changes that they're going to have to change again.
I would also add that typically the council has always had a period of change like that, to not coming in at their to the old standards. They're much more likely the standards, even if the else. Everybody moving toward the new standards as quickly as possible. With Molly, please call her. Always happy to work with everyone. Thank you, Molly and Lauren. We really appreciate your closely. And reason for public health. The CEPH have a reverse.
No. A pretty clear stance on this, and what we do is we want to choose graduation. So if you have full-time students who usually graduate in 7 years, for us, that's fine. But the way in which we want maximum time, and that means the maximum typically for your part-time students.
There's a footnote. Number 8 on page 11, the school program must choose each joint 3. What does that mean?
Document. Let me just have somebody. All right, what that is referring to. So this is the first time in the document where we start talking about concentrations and visualizations, however you'd like to call them, in much greater detail in the curricular criterion. But it comes up here because of the way of visualization, and so which is discussed in greater detail later. We've indicated these criteria. Individuals may be deemed to be completing their ocean, or those individuals may be deemed to be completing an existing concentration. So if your promotion epidemiology and environmental health, and you have an MD-MPH program, now maybe those MD-MPH students just take the epidemiology concentration, and the institutions or alignments but they're still using the template of the epidemiology concentration and altering it as appropriate. Or folks have told us that sometimes what they like the freedom to do with joint or dual degrees is develop a unique set of competencies for that particular population of students. So that's okay too. Our criteria allow for either one of those, but what we need you to do is pick approaches for each of the joint or dual degrees so that we can be consistent everywhere in the document when we're talking about it, so that we know how many faculty resources we need to associate with that, so that we know whether we should be looking for a separate set of concentration-specific competencies, so that we can see the ways in which any course substitutions or differentiations from the typical track are aligning with the curriculum. So that's what we mean by picking an approach and sticking with it for joint or dual degrees.
So I'd like to ask a follow-up question about that. If a school is using existing concentrations, including potentially a generalist concentration, the dual degree program, the faculty who are required, say those three faculty, the discrete faculty member and the others, they would be the same at that concentration in general. But if there is a new unique concentration put together, let's say if you use the example of the MD and PH, if there is a unique concentration put together for the MD and PH program, do there need to be those three additional faculty identified to support that unique concentration for those dual degree students?
That's exactly right.
And that seems to me to be an issue that it would be of great interest to our members, because oftentimes these dual degree programs are not large, and so you know, they probably don't impose great burden on the faculty complement within a school or program, and so having to identify a unique or another set of three faculty, including a discrete faculty member, may not be the direction that schools would want to go. So this is an issue I think we should be thinking about.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I'm really glad that that was framed in that particular way. We are trying to create options, and you know, I think David highlighted some of the drawbacks of that option. I would say that the naming of three faculty for an MD and PH concentration maybe isn't as burdensome as it sounds at first. You do have to have a discrete faculty member, that much is true, but those other contributing faculty members, if appropriate, and they have the appropriate qualifications, could be drawn from the other degree program. So I think that there's no flexibility with regard to the discrete faculty member, but many of the schools that we work with have more discrete faculty members than they would need for the concentrations that they have at the current moment. So I do agree with David's analysis, and I think it would take some careful attention in each particular setting, but I do think that it's an option for some of the institutions that we work with.
We also do have some institutions that have very large dual degree programs because that's what they focus on. And so keep in mind, we're trying to balance the needs of those who have maybe one or two dual degree students in a dual degree, and those who maybe almost their entire student population is in a dual degree.
Yeah, we have certain programs
Yeah.
that have, gosh, I want to say 40 to 60 dual degree students at any particular point in time.
Well, it sounds like this is another area where there's a lot of flexibility, and so schools and programs can take advantage of that flexibility, and I think that's probably very welcome.
David, this is Ruth. May I just ask another question of clarification?
Please.
The question is, if there is a program or school with a number of different dual degrees, are you meaning that you have to choose whether you have separate tracks, sort of separate ones or for each, or just for all of them? So for instance, if the MD-MPH, we wanted to have a discrete track, but we wanted all of the others to choose one of our other tracks, is that okay? Or were you saying if you go the route with one dual degree, then you have to have separate ones for all of your individual for all your dual degrees?
No, Ruth, you could mix and match, as you said. You could have the MD-MPH doing their own track, and then everybody else, the JD-MPH and the MSN-MPH, have to choose your EPI track or your health promotion track. You can mix and match, again, as long as you are consistent for each joint or dual degree program as you follow it through the document. They don't all have to be the same as one another.
Thank you.
The next question that I'm going to pull out relates to the faculty counting, since we're on that topic. On page 10, under C2, the definition of primary instructional faculty excludes faculty who may be teaching in a non-public health degree, but who are mentoring a CRPH student. Curious as to why these folks would be excluded, given the importance of this mentoring for integrating key public health concepts.
Well, we chose to use the term primary instructional faculty very intentionally, and that is not to devalue the idea that mentoring a doctoral student is instruction. We absolutely would expect to cadre of individuals in that sort of secondary or non-primary instructional faculty role. Individuals need to be there who have the appropriate skills, and individuals need to be there in appropriate quantity to mentor the doctoral students. However, we're talking about something very specific when we talk about primary instructional faculty, and that is individuals who are teaching in the classroom. And so that's the rationale. That's sort of the bright line that we drew. And again, that's a floor, the 21 or the 3 plus some modifications depending on how many concentrations there are. But that's the floor, and that's something we've felt fairly strongly about as a definitional issue.
Okay, there's a question about the PowerPoint, and yes, it's actually already available. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen in the docking station, it's there in a PDF format. Here's a question about the integrated teaching approach that is recommended in the Framing the Future report. It says USF has done some developing integrated teaching approaches for its MPH programs. The criteria lend themselves to an integrated teaching approach. Does CEPH have any specific expectations about integrated teaching of required competencies and content? The resources available to small programs versus large schools would likely result in varied responses to integrated instruction. So the question, to see expectations about integrated teaching of the required competencies and content.
We certainly hope, as the commenter suggested, that folks will feel free to experiment to do the types of innovation that fit best in their setting, but the answer is no. There's no expectation defined in the criteria for a particular style.
Okay, we encourage more questions into the question box. It looks like that I've covered all the ones that are in there right now. So please step up if you have anything else you'd like to comment on or ask about regarding the criteria. Here's one in. Where is the issue of portfolio? If I could go back to round 2, recommendation was to delete the portfolio from the criteria.
So, thank you for that question. This was a topic of, extending. I can assure you that A variety of points and counterpoints were discussed and debated, etc. However, where we came down in the end, and I sort of alluded to this in sort of clarification in the slide that talked about clarifying, so it seemed to be confusing. We deleted almost all uses of the word portfolio because the council felt that people were assigning a definition to that word that was not the intended definition, and that continued to be obviously something that was confusing to folks. What the council did feel very strongly about is the idea of a portfolio assessment method. And so the idea is that a student's work is assessed based on a linkage of documentation to competencies. And that's what the council felt really strongly about. We feel really strongly about moving away from an input model to an output model. So instead of measuring how many hours somebody's sitting at their desk at a practice experience, we want to see what kinds of skills and knowledge and applied product or products that individual is able to produce. In fact, because we knew that there was a lot of sensitivity around the word portfolio, we spent some time trying to think of a different word that meant the same thing. And finally, we concluded that no, in fact, the term for what we mean is a portfolio approach to assessment. What we've said in this version in some of the marginal notes is that that does not mean that if you picture in your mind a pile of paper that has traditionally been used as a portfolio, you don't have to do that thing that you're picturing. E-portfolios, you're picturing that, you don't have to do that. What we're talking about is a specific assessment approach, not a specific electronic or physical product.
Thank you, Molly. And in a few phone calls with some membership groups, that when we did go over that point, it was appreciated, the amount of flexibility and the use of the portfolio approach. All right, here's a question regarding D6. There's language, regardless of the amount of level of prior experience, all DRPH students complete an applied field experience. Will you permit waivers? For example, it is awkward to have a deputy director of a country's Ministry of Health complete a field experience.
So the answer is no. The intention is not to permit waivers. And again, this was something that was not sort of tossed off lightly, but was the product. That decision was the product, a very intentional product of discussion. What I think is really important in thinking about the DRPH practice is the same thing that we were just talking about with the MPH practice, that we're moving from that input model where the individual has to take off work and go sit in somebody else's office and be his or her intern. That's not what we're talking about anymore. We're talking about showing opportunities to apply concepts, knowledge, and skills that the individual is learning in his or her program, the opportunity to apply those to real-world products and settings. That's what we expect at the DRPH level, and the idea is that it is a part of the instructional experience. There are a variety of ways that individual could do something that would not, we think, be awkward at all, but would allow the individual to perhaps consult with an organization where he or she could give expertise to that organization. There are lots of ways to produce a product that would allow the individual to apply the new things that he or she is learning without following what we think of as a traditional internship model.
Molly, when you say opportunity to consult, something that comes to mind is sitting on a board for another organization. Would something like that be acceptable if there is some product related to that participation?
Well, I think the devil is always in the details. So sitting on a board, no. But if this individual was on a board and leading a task force where that particular board is imagining a new way to do a particular service, or a new group that the board was going to be doing outreach to, if there was that type of scenario where the individual in the board was leading a work group and producing some kind of product and analysis, then I think that could be an appropriate setting.
Or leading a strategic planning process.
Okay.
Or completing some kind of, there are plenty of leadership opportunities, I think, that could lead to a product.
Okay. And just to push that a little more regarding the product, could it be a a writing up of the process, or it would always have to be hardcore outcome oriented?
It would be linked to competencies.
Linked to, okay.
So if the product demonstrates the competency that the student has achieved the competency, then that would work. So probably simply writing up a process. I don't know. I guess it kind of just depends what they chose for competencies.
Right. Thanks for clarifying that. I think that's some language that we may need to add, that it has to be linked to the competencies to really make clear what is aiming, what the intent is.
Yeah, we would definitely welcome suggestions on ways to make this clearer. I think usually when we hear confusion, it's because, in many cases, it's because we have an opportunity to explain something in a clearer way.
Okay, this next question is going back to a prior one asked by the same person. Can you please clarify how an adjunct instructor can meet the criteria for being a discrete faculty member?
An adjunct faculty member cannot be a discrete faculty member. He or she can be one of the three in that situation where there's a discrete and then two individuals to make three for a concentration. He or she could be numbers 2 or 3, but could not be the discrete faculty member.
Okay. Next one, what are the expectations for programs related to interprofessional education?
We did add a competency. We have a competency on interprofessional education explicitly in the MPH competencies. I think in our desire to shorten the list and condense things a little bit, that was one we felt really strongly about keeping in. It's always hard to choose among so many different priorities, but we feel like that's a big enough one, important enough to keep in. Again, with this approach, we're not being particularly prescriptive about what that interprofessional work is going to look like, but we do expect it as part of the training for MPH and DRPH students.
And one of the reasons that that's so important is that there, and I'm not sure who asked the question, and this may be something that you already know, but there's been a lot of work, and actually ASPPH has been very involved in the IPEC work and interprofessional competencies, and so all of those those 6 organizations, which is medicine, osteopathic medicine, nursing, pharmacy, dentistry, and public health, are all including interprofessional education. So if we were to exclude it, we would be an outlier in that group of 6, and that is not something that we believe would be in our best interest as a field.
Here's a related question. Do you consider interprofessional to be synonymous with interdisciplinary, or are these different?
Oh, they're different. They are different. So interdisciplinary, the way that we have defined it before, is really interdisciplinary within public health. So public health itself has so many disciplines, and interdisciplinary has in the past been defined more as, you know, epidemiologists working with health promotion professionals, or how MCH interacts with environmental health or something. That is not what we're talking about. Interprofessional, we're talking about interaction with other, both health and non-health related professions. So perhaps it's, and this again will depend on the context specifically of the school or program. So not every university has a medical school, for example. So interprofessional may not, at that place, mean public health and medicine. It may mean public health and engineering. Or, you know, and mixing in other kinds of professions as well. So it will really be really individualized, but expected.
Okay, thank you. I had to get some clarification on this next question, and it relates to section H4, number 3. It's, and then going back to the 2011 criteria, schools were able to name their own outcome measures. In this draft criteria, schools and programs select from a list of predefined measures. Could you speak to how this meets CEPH's goal of increasing flexibility, or alternatively, in the list of outcomes, would it be possible to add an additional option that would allow a school program to define an outcome that is not currently on the list?
So in line 2219 on page 46, what we say is, in addition to providing at least one from the list that follows, the school or program may add measures that are significant to its own measure or its own mission and context. So all we're asking you to do is one from the list. And the list is, we think, pretty broad. And so I think it has not been our position that it's burdensome. I will say what we've struggled with a lot, we've for years had open-ended, totally open-ended outcome measures. So tell us how you define success in your context on any number of criteria. And you know, I'm going to be completely candid, it doesn't work particularly well. Schools and programs are constantly coming to CEPH saying, what are you looking for? Tell me what you're looking for. And site visit teams are constantly saying, this measure doesn't make sense, or this is kind of a weak measure. So we're trying to strike that balance. All you have to do is pick one of the ones that we've chosen, and then you can go and add as many as you'd like that are specific to your own context.
All right, another interprofessional question. Can you define interprofessional requirements? Not all schools or programs are a part of large health science centers with multiple health professional schools.
That's kind of what Laura just said, that the professions can be defined based on your own context, and it doesn't have to be, you know, we don't have some broad number that you should be with 6 other professions. The professions might be engineering, or it might be law or architecture, and you might have just 1 or 2 of those, but do that really well. So I think there's some open-endedness to that's going to be specific to everyone's own setting, but I don't think any of our schools or programs are in a setting where they don't have any other professions that would work with public health.
If you're particularly interested in looking more, like as Molly said, we've really boiled down IPE into one competency that we thought was kind of overarching and important. But I encourage you, if you just Google, I don't know the website off my top of my head, but if you just Google IPEC competency model, you'll come up with a long document actually with many interprofessional education competencies and also some narrative talking about it. Also, the University of Minnesota has a center specifically focused on interprofessional education, and so I encourage you to look that up as well. They're kind of a national leader in what's going on in IPE, and I think that they might have things like case studies, technical assistance. So if that's something you're interested in doing more research on, absolutely, I encourage you to do that.
This is David. I would also recommend that you take a look at the ASPPH document on population health in all professions. There's some nice context in there for thinking about IPE from a framework broader than just other health professions and the healthcare professions specifically. And that document may also be of interest to you.
Okay, we have 6 minutes left. I think we could get in one more question. Here goes. Is the expectation that MPH students must experience actual work on an interprofessional team, or is it okay to learn how to operate effectively in such teams?
Well, it's one of our competencies, and obviously there are a variety of ways to demonstrate competencies, and one of the ways is simulation. I think each program or school will have to decide for themselves if they believe that they can assess this particular skill purely through simulation or a very limited or distance-based, I don't know, I'm just thinking of the different approaches you might take. I don't think, I do think that there is an emerging consensus that this is a really important issue, and as Laura highlighted, there are a lot of resources out there, but we're not going to be any more prescriptive about the way you assess that particular competency than we are about the way you assess any other particular competency. We are going to ask that all schools and programs be rigorous in thinking about how they feel right in terms of assessing each of the competencies that's defined.
So I guess, Liz, you're turning it back over to me, and I want to thank Laura and Molly for being on the webinar with us today to take questions and to try to clarify the intent within the document. Also want to thank all of our members for being on the webinar today. Thank you for submitting these questions. We will use your questions as well as the responses from Molly and Laura to begin to put together feedback on this document. If you had other questions come in, thanks for submitting those as well. We'll take a look at them and try to get answers back to you on those as well. Here is a slide showing what our next steps are. I've mentioned previously the groups that have been established to review the document and give input into ASPPH, though some of them are already meeting, others will be meeting. We will have an accreditation committee meeting when we get together in March. We have another meeting in April. We have a deadline for all the groups to submit their comments into ASPPH by April 19th so that we can get a draft together. We are contemplating having another either focus group or webinar to look at our draft response in late April, and then there will be a draft of our response to CEPH circulated to all of our members by late April or early May, and of course our response is due to CEPH by May 16th for this round. So we look forward to your contributions along the way and your participation in this process. As shown here, we hope you'll agree that we're carefully listening to you, and we'll review this discussion. We do have staff from ASPPH to each of the organized groups that were listed on a previous slide, and that's going to help us put all this together. Liz has just been fantastic in coordinating and synthesizing the input from groups in the past, and it's been a pleasure to work with her in this process. So please continue to submit your material, your input. There's an online community that you can also submit input through, and as also shown there, there'll be an archived copy of this webinar made available. And this is how you get to the online community. Liz, anything left you'd like me to address other than to say thank you to you again and to Molly and Laura?
I think you've just about covered it. I would like for those who still have outstanding questions in the chat box to know that we will answer your questions post-call. Appreciate you all joining and look forward to hearing what else you have to say about the criteria in the coming weeks. We look forward in the next week or so. We'll start posting in online community some of the results from group discussions that we'd like to share with all of you so you can get some insights and perspectives into how some members' reactions to the criteria may affect you. If you agree or not, we'd love to hear that to help us in forming the consensus-wide ASPPH-wide response. So thanks to David, thanks to our CEPH counselors, thanks to our CEPH representatives. The call is adjourned.